Okay, so hello, welcome everyone officially to the Undergraduate Research Education Series. Welcome if you have never attended one of these events before. Welcome back if you have. My name is Shiver. I organize the series, and that's why I start and end all of these videos and all of these events. And so you'll see my face a lot, even though I'm not the person with the interesting content. So the very first thing that we want to do is start with a land acknowledgement. So the American Indian Resource Center here at the University of Utah leads the way for me to acknowledge that the land that the University of Utah resides on has always been on Indigenous lands, specifically on the lands of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. And I encourage you to think about the Indigenous peoples of whatever land you're on today if you are not also currently in Salt Lake City. It's imperative that we acknowledge the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. Through this land acknowledgement, I want to express my personal gratitude and appreciation for their persevering to protect this land for future generations. The erasure of this relationship between Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands is an insidious form of ongoing colonization, and we need to build our mindfulness of this and of other Indigenous protocols. And in my opinion, the best way, the first necessary step to respecting Indigenous peoples would be to give the land back. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. We will do one small bit of housekeeping just so for everybody who is in the call, you know how your attendance gets recorded. And then we'll hand it over to Allyson Mower, who's going to talk to us about how to keep up with literature, because it turns out that's not intuitive, it's hard, but there are some ways that you can do it. So the housekeeping. If you are logged into the call in real time right now, your attendance has already been taken care of. You don't have to worry about that at all. Your registration to Zoom does that. If you are watching this video later and you want that to satisfy your education series attendance requirement for any of the variety of programs going on this summer that have that attendance requirement, please go to the top of the education series page and fill out the Undergraduate Research Education Series evaluation form. I will also drop a link to that in the chat for those of you attending in real time, but that's optional for you. It is necessary if you're watching the video. You have to fill it out. You have to give me your unit, or I don't know that you've done it. Okay, and I think that's all of the beginning stuff. And now we get to the much more interesting content. We have Allyson Mower, who is a librarian at the Marriott Library here on campus at the U. Knows a whole bunch of stuff. Allyson's given this presentation before and it's super helpful, so get excited. Allyson, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shiver. I really appreciate the invitation. And this is such a fun group to present to. It's great to see your faces and your names. And I want this to be, very conversational and informal. We're here in summer finally, and I'm just here in my office at the library. So please feel free to unmute and ask questions as I'm going. And you can also, reach out to me, librarians, we look forward to seeing you. It's sort of why we're here. There's lots of service points within the library building itself at Marriott Library. You can ask for me at one of those service points. You can come up to the 5th floor. That's where my office is. And you can ask for me at the admin suite. You can email me, you can call me, however you feel like reaching out, and I am available. I have actually been coming in every day. I could not handle the telecommuting during the whole, quarantine and lockdown. And so as soon as I was able to come back, I've been coming every day since school started last year. I am here Monday through Friday. So I really appreciated the invitation from Shiver, and so we did this last year and the attendance was fantastic. And it looks like we have really great attendance this year too, which is so exciting. And the feedback from last year was really positive. So I'm kind of going to try and just kind of pick up on some of the feedback from last year and just sort of run with what I did as well. But I also kind of incorporated a little bit of the feedback too. So, I'm very open to suggestions, and I know there's a couple of questions that already came in too. And so I'll kind of try and address those as I'm talking as we're going. And I just also want to say that the OUR office is amazing. You're so lucky to be able to be working with Annie and, as the director, and she's so wonderful. So I hope you all are having a good experience and that you're working with great professors and great researchers and learning a lot. So it's a great program. Okay, so I'm actually going to not even share my screen. I mean, unless, somebody sort of requests like a certain screenshot of a library database, we can do that. But what I kind of like to do is I like to use the chat. I don't know if that bugs people, but I don't know. I've come to enjoy it, even though I have a love-hate relationship with Zoom. So these are the 5 topics that I want to cover today. And I should put in the main title too. The title of the session is 5 Ways to Keep Up with the Literature. And the title also has my email address in it, so you can reach out to me. I know the U is missing from undergraduate because I have it in this really cute block U. So I'm going to upload the file as the PDF, and then you can see the little block U, and that's what spells out the U in undergraduate research education series. Okay, so we're going to talk about these 5 topic areas of, different ways of keeping up with the literature, which, yes, as Shiver was saying, it can kind of feel not so intuitive, and it can kind of feel like you're just like, it's a fire hose, and it just feels overwhelming. So I've just sort of developed these 5 approaches over the years, and hopefully they will work for you too. So I just thought I would kind of talk about each one individually and then kind of go into details. And, if you have any questions, again, like about any one of these topic areas, please feel free to put something in the chat or unmute and just ask your question. Okay, so also while I'm thinking of it, let me just put the PDF file in chat as well, so you can be following along that way if you prefer. So give me just 1 second to browse to the file. So it's a PDF. It will show up in the chat, but you have to kind of click on it a couple of times, sometimes to get it to download. And if you're on like a shared computer and there's any kind of like firewall, sometimes there's a limitation. If that's the case, just please send me a private chat or send me an email and I can send you the document that way. Okay, so let's start with number 1 here. So when like the topic of literature comes up, I immediately think like the journal literature, because that's what's so kind of pervasive and there's so many articles a year. So I'm kind of going off of that assumption of the literature equating to journal articles, but it's a broad term too. And you can include other types of works in the phrase and the term literature. Of course, it would include books. It could include like presentations and, proceedings. So, but I'm kind of just coming at it a little bit from the journal angle. But if you want to know more about books and other scholarly communication outlets, then we can kind of go that direction too. But what I have found to be one of the easiest ways to keep up with literature is to join a journal club. And there are lots of different ways to do that. In fact, you could even start your own journal club if you don't find one that really meets your discipline and your need. So the first one, I just have to give a shout out for my own discipline and my own journal club that I happen to run. And it's called Reading for Research in LIS. So LIS stands for Library and Information Science. I know we don't have an LIS department on this campus, like an academic department, but for librarianship, we try and keep up with that discipline. And that's really kind of where a lot of our research falls, is within LIS. So I started a journal club because I needed to keep up with the literature. Librarians at the U of U, we are categorized as faculty and we have to follow the same tenure standards as other faculty do. So we have to do original research, conduct original research and then produce it and publish it. So I typically so I've been doing this for 20 years or so, and I've done primarily historical based research. So I've looked at like the history of the University of Utah and like its authorship history, like when authorship really started at the institution, when it became required. And then I look at what people have produced as authors at the U of U. So it's kind of like, in terms of this presentation, it feels very meta. So like I study basically like authorship and publishing at the institution, but broader too, like within the US. So that, has kind of been my research focus the last 20 years, is using historical methods. But just this year, I had to kind of pivot a little bit because I sort of quickly realized, I mean, maybe not so quickly, just over my career, I have realized that there's this really close intersection between authorship and publishing and reading. Of course, I mean, duh, it's like this no-brainer. But I was like, oh, I need to also, while I'm figuring out like, what's been produced by the institution and by those in the state as authors, like what is it that people read essentially too? Like, is there any kind of correlation between like authorship and reading? That's kind of where my current research inquiry is. So, but to study reading takes like totally different methodology than doing historical studies. So I've had to kind of pivot into this much more social science-based methods. And okay, library school gave me some kind of training on social science research methods, but that was back in 2009. That was quite a while ago. So I had to really kind of re-educate myself on that research method area. So that's what this journal club kind of helped me personally sort of wrap my head around, and then my colleagues too within the building. And then, it's open to anybody in the institution, because we don't have this academic discipline of library and information science. I sort of figured we could open it up to anybody that's sort of interested in that as a domain and as a discipline, and keeping up with the literature in that discipline. So that's one way, but there's other journal clubs at the institution, and, like national journal clubs too. So another one that I really like, that I think is fun to participate in, is it's a live stream preprint journal club. So it's really pretty kind of entertaining. Does everybody know what a preprint is? Okay, so in the journal world, man, it's a layered world. So, it's like you read a journal article and it's gone through basically many different iterations, and it's what you typically read like in a print, paper-based journal is like, it's called the post print. So it's on like version 3, basically, of what the author has created. So you all, as potential future authors, hopefully, as researchers, you're going to kind of go through these stages. So you write a manuscript, that's when you become an author, and that's like version 1, the manuscript. Then, that in itself will go through all kinds of iterations and editing as you I'm sure know, just through the writing process. So, but that's called the manuscript. And then the manuscript usually, it gets submitted to a journal, and then that journal takes it through its process of publishing. So like, there's an editor, and the editor looks at the paper and decides who a good reviewer or set of reviewers would be, like peer reviewers. And then that manuscript version goes out to the peer reviewers. And then usually there's always there's like some commentary and some suggestions, and then those come back to the editor, and then also back to the author. And then that goes from the manuscript version to this kind of final peer-reviewed version of the manuscript. So manuscript to final peer-reviewed. And then there's sometimes like, even like after the peer review, then like the publisher will kind of do some of their layout work and make it look really nice and turn into a PDF and put on like their logo. And then that becomes this post print. So preprints are kind of like basically the manuscript, but they can also kind of sometimes be this peer-reviewed version too. So you're kind of essentially getting like this pre-review of like a potentially final published paper. So there's lots of preprint servers now that are out there. It's kind of a big shift within the scholarly communication world, like mostly because of the web, that now we have like this worldwide distribution system. So people will post their manuscripts as preprints, and then they'll, take them through like the usual journal process, but you can basically read this preprint version. And that's what this journal club basically organizes. So they partner with different publishers. So like in the version I went to, they partnered with the Public Library of Science, and then together with Public Library of Science plus this preprint review group, they chose an article to review, and then everybody from across the globe came together, and like I think I had to like get up at like 7 o'clock in the morning or something to like, you know, use like the Greenwich Mean Time or whatever, and like we all met and then read, you know, we read the preprint beforehand, and then we went through all the components of the preprint, and then people gave their feedback and then asked questions of the group members. I don't think the author was at that one, but some journal clubs will have the authors there too. So Evan, ResearchGate tends to deal more with post prints, but I think like they're not technically a preprint server in the way that like Archive with an X is a preprint server. So ARXIV, that's a pretty popular preprint server. And ResearchGate is kind of like a personal, like scholarly profile management platform. Like, you know, different authors can post their content there if they want, but they could do like preprint and postprint if the publisher's policy allows for the postprint. So it's kind of like a combination and not just strictly preprint. So those are fun, like, you know, those live stream journal clubs, it was very entertaining. So I would definitely recommend that. I mean, it was educational and like entertaining and kind of fun all at the same time. So it would be a good way to keep up. I mean, I do maybe just want to caution, like when you start heading down into preprint land, you can sort of feel really quickly overwhelmed, because I mean, even just the post-print world can feel overwhelming. And so like, if you it's like maybe a good idea to kind of like get your head around the post-print already happening like in the last year's worth or something of content in your discipline or subdiscipline, kind of get a sense of like what's going on in the post-print world, and then maybe really dive into preprint, so that just to kind of not feel like your head's going to explode with too much information. But it's a great introduction to just like, you know, how the basic research method within the subdiscipline works, and it's a good way to learn that basic process. Okay, and then so another one, the School of Medicine, I think the UVU School of Medicine has a couple of journal clubs. I think I just did like a campus website search for journal clubs, so you could kind of see if there's something like in your department. I think I had found one in biology too at some point, but then it looked like maybe it was defunct. But the School of Medicine one looked still active. And then you could just ask around too. So like if you happen to be like in a lab, like in a building here on campus, you know, you could ask like the lab manager, or even ask whatever professor you're working with to see if they are aware of a journal club. And then if there's not, definitely start your own. I mean, there's no reason not to. And the library is definitely here. Like I am here to help with that. So I am happy to help people establish journal clubs. Just before the pandemic, that was actually, we were going to start one in the School of Social Work and the College of Social Work, and we were really excited. And then everything fell apart, of course. And then the professor that I was working with ended up retiring too. So then I've not really been able to pick up on it again. But our whole plan was, you know, for me to work closely with the professor. I'd be happy to also work closely with you as student researchers, and then just kind of like looking at what the top journals are in the discipline or subdiscipline, and then kind of, you know, choosing articles on a rotating basis from those top journals. So it'd be pretty kind of not a lot of heavy lifting that's required. And then really it's just a matter of deciding like how often the group is going to meet, and you know, in what platform, and then if it's going to be one article at a time, if it's going to be, you know, like 2 or 3, like it's just kind of those details that you would work out. And so I'd be very happy to help start one if you don't find a good one that's in your discipline that seems like it would be useful. Okay, so there's a journal club idea. I'll just pause for a second. Oh, Eliana has a question. No, like it doesn't have to be associated with a specific department on campus. Like, I mean, like I started this one in the library, because I'm kind of housed here in the library. I think it really would just depend on where the interest is. And then especially if like, maybe there's like a sub-discipline that you all are active in that is like, transdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary. And maybe there's not like a great journal club that's kind of covering, I don't know, something that's in, both like College of Engineering and like the School of Business or something, like maybe there needs to be kind of a cross-discipline based journal club based on the projects you all are working on. And so, yeah, it doesn't have to be like just in one department area. And the library has like, we have a couple hopefully somewhat popular social media platforms. So like that's what we use to kind of advertise our different reading clubs. And it could very easily, be something that the library helps advertise if there is a journal club that you want to start. And thanks, Shiver, for posting the journal club search. How did it look? I haven't looked in a while. Did you see anything new? Oh yeah, there's the School of Medicine.
Lots of School of Medicine, Department of Anthropology. There's a ton of health related stuff. And then a smattering of other departments, locations on campus kind of throughout the 10 pages on the return for that.
Sorry. Yeah. So neuroscience, genetics. There's mathematical biology. Maybe that's the one I was thinking of. So yeah, I mean, those that are associated with the department, like in this search, I mean, it probably just means that like somebody in that department started it and then it just got, like posted on their website. And so that's why it's coming up in the search. So like, really, again, it's like, it would be totally fine to start one wherever you happen to be located. And if you feel like you don't want it to be associated with the department, then you could definitely associate it with the library and that would be fine. Okay, so there's topic 1, option 1, join a journal club. All right, the second one that I find quite fun too is I'm really showing you all my inner nerdiness here is to listen to podcasts. It is like quick and easy way of staying up to date. So one that I want to start with, it's called Philosophy Talk. We added it to the library's collection a couple of years ago, and it's really fun to listen to. So let me put the name of that. Oh, thanks, Margaret and Zach. Looks like there's a journal club in astrophysics. Oh, Astro Coffee, fun. And High Energy Journal Club, cool. That's great to know. Thank you. Okay, so a podcast I really like, Philosophy Talk is one. And so, some of them are free. I'm sure, as you all know, like you just use your basic, however you get your podcasts on whatever app on your listening device. And so Philosophy Talk is also, it's like a radio, as most podcasts have started. It started as a radio show. And then I think like you can listen to some episodes for free, but if you want to get everything, then the library has paid for the subscription so you can get access to everything. So Philosophy Talk is a good one. And then I like there's a journal, the journal called Science, which I'm sure you all know about. They also have a podcast that I think is really good. And Nature, the journal Nature, has a podcast too. And then let me just put in the chat too some other recommendations from other students over the years. So one, which I have not listened to yet myself, but they seemed like good suggestions. One is called Mindscapes. And then one that another student liked was called This Week in Virology, another one Exploring GIS, and one called Weather Geeks. I mean, they all sound really fun. So I have compiled these along with others into a whole guide, like we call them LibGuides or research guides. So I'm going to put a link to that too. And this is all in that document. So I know you don't have to like pull everything from the chat if you don't want. But there's like, I basically have like a podcast guide, and then like I have some reading recommendation guides, and then I have like tons of guides. So, but the one will take you just to finding good podcasts. So I have a Mac that I use for my work laptop, and I just use the Apple Podcast app that comes with the laptop. And then like, I would say maybe like once a week or so, there's one that I really like that's within my profession called, it's got a funny name. It's called Velocity of Content, but it comes from the Copyright Clearance Center, and like they have a new episode every week. So then they're only like 15 minutes long, and it's really great because like it kind of gives me a nice broad overview of like what's happening in the larger publishing world, and then just like the world of authorship too. And then, but like science and nature, like and like journal-based podcasts are great because they talk about what they recently have published in the journal. So then it's like, you don't have to do like all the reading, you just get basically that week's worth of highlights, and then you get some commentary. So it really is like this great snapshot and window into what's going on in a discipline or subdiscipline. Okay, there's a couple of other suggestions here. Thank you, everybody. So Shiver has one for epidemiology. Cool. Eliana, it's called Ologies. Nice. And then Nancy. Oh, Dr. Sparks has one. I think I had heard that. And I haven't listened to his yet, but he's so great. So that's good to know about Taylor Sparks' podcast. Awesome. Thanks, Nancy. Okay, and Katie, help me out. Like, was that maybe just...
Yeah, that was a mistake. I was trying to copy and paste.
I'm like, I'm not the most tech savvy, so I'm like, that could mean something. Who knows? Okay, so any other suggestions for podcasts that people like? All right, it does feel like cheating, but I kind of love it. Like, especially if you're any kind of commuter, like train commuter, car commuter. I actually walk, and I used to kind of listen to podcasts as I walked, but now I have to kind of like have downtime. So I use it just to walk. But yeah, it's a great way like to spend commute time. Okay, so let's move on to topic 3, which is to find your favorite journal and your favorite scholarly society. It's going to really help with the fire hose issue, and it will keep you focused just on one area, and kind of build that familiarity for yourself. And then you can kind of branch out from there. So it can be difficult to find your favorite scholarly journal because it sounds so weird. Like, who would ever think you'd have a favorite scholarly journal? But, I actually have one, and I've come to just love it over the years because it's high quality and it's easy for me to get access to because it's an open access journal. And it's just web-based, so I can read it on my phone, it's HTML, and I don't have to wait for it to come in the mail or anything. So that one is kind of my go-to. It's called, and not that this would become your favorite, but just so you can kind of know, it's okay to have a favorite scholarly journal. It's called Evidence-Based Library and Information Practice, EBLIP. That's what their acronym is. So I actually am also a peer reviewer for the journal. So I kind of know the editor and the other peer reviewers. So it's, kind of like this little community in a way. So I'm always looking forward to seeing what's going to come out in the journal. And then for librarianship, sometimes we're not the best at using evidence for our practices, for our research, that's kind of a separate thing, our scholarly research. But when it comes to day-to-day library practices, things just build up over the years, and we don't always use data to make decisions about what to do within a library. So that's one of the big reasons I like the journal, is because, they're asking basically practitioners to go and gather some data to kind of justify the decisions that they're making. And then that kind of just helps me within my librarianship practice. And then it's OA, like I said, open access. So I don't have to pay anything to get to it. And this is going to sound bad, and I don't have to go through a library subscription. to find it. Like it's just on the web and it's super easy. And I can just read it on my phone, like I was saying. So because journals like are more than just journals, because they are basically like these little mini communities, like going and finding your favorite is it's kind of essentially what it will end up meaning for you, is that you get connected to other people just through the process of reading a journal. Like you learn names, you learn about people who are active in the discipline. And then, when you, at whatever point you get to like meet someone in person, like go to a conference or attend like a seminar or whatever, you're going to recognize the name and you're going to be able to just like strike up conversation and be like, oh my gosh, I really appreciate your journal, or I read your article from 2 months ago, and your research method was so unique and I kind of wanted to implement it for myself. It's like that's kind of how you're going to start making connections within the larger academic discipline. So it's definitely more than a journal, and it's definitely more than just like totally keeping up with the literature. That's part of it. Of course, it's part of it, but it's, it really is you kind of creating a community for yourself. So most journals are going to be tied to a society, not every journal. So the one that, my favorite, EB Lip, it's not tied to a society, but some of my other favorite journals are. So the society that I have really come to enjoy being part of is, I know you're going to be surprised here, is called the Society for the History of Authorship, Reading, and Publishing. And like, I didn't know it existed. Like when I was in graduate school, I found out about it later and I was like, oh my goodness, like this is so perfect. Like, this is exactly what I study. And so it's an international society, and I've attended one of their meetings so far, but they have a journal. So it's called Book History. So this is the one, it's funny. It's like, this is kind of old school. It's like, I have to wait for it to come in the mail. It only comes once a year, and it's got about, 10 or so papers in one issue. So it's a couple hundred some odd pages. And then like, I've just follow this society. So like I go to their meetings, and then I'm on their listserv. And then, I follow them on Twitter, and then I read the paper journal when it comes. So for my scholarly research, this is the society that I am like most embedded in. And then, I keep up with the literature basically by reading the journal when it comes to me in the mail as a member of the society. So that's one reason to sort of find your favorite society is that you typically pay a membership fee. So, you're wanting to be really picky and choosy because the membership fees like usually come from your own pocket. So like, the U of U doesn't pay my membership fees. I pay my own membership fees, and you want to really find one that's going to match your research interests. And it can take time to figure out your research interests. So like kind of give yourself that latitude too. And like, because the journals are going to be quote unquote free to you, like through a library subscription, like starting with the journals first is going to, make it so you don't have to pay anything, that you get to kind of familiarize yourself at no cost to you. And then as you're kind of figuring out and really finding your research interests home, then, by the time you kind of get that solidified, paying $100 a year for the membership won't feel quite as taxing. Okay, so any thoughts on favorite journal or favorite scholarly society? And I do have a guide for finding a scholarly society. It's like, there's a lot of them. And so there is like an aggregator site. It's called the American Council of Learned Societies, ACLS. And they do a really good job at bringing together like humanities and social science-based societies and science as well. They're not so good at bringing together like medicine and engineering and like tech societies. So I kind of use a combination of ACLS and then just Wikipedia and to see so you can see a nice long list of societies. So you could kind of just go by discipline basically, and then, just kind of start reading up and see which ones would be a good fit. Okay, so a couple other podcast recommendations. Thank you from Rachel, who also likes materialism. And then Gabrielle, Andrew Huberman Lab. Is that a lab here at the U of U? That's pretty cool. If it is. Okay, so there's our first 3 ways of keeping up with the literature. The next way, which can feel daunting, but maybe necessary, is setting up a topic alert within a discipline's database. So this is where it can kind of feel like fire hose a little bit. So I kind of wanted to put it down further on the list so that you wouldn't like maybe be starting with the thing that's like too much like information overload. So, okay, basically like each discipline essentially like has its own database. So, okay, so like book history, this is within like probably the discipline of history. So this is probably one of 500, maybe 1,000 journals in the discipline of history. So like when you get into a database, like essentially you are seeing the list of what all 1,000 history journals and all of the papers that they have published since, maybe some started in 1750, maybe some have started in the 1800s, maybe some have started in the 2000s. That's what you're going to get in a database. You're going to get the index of all of the papers from all the journals in that discipline. That's what makes it feel like a fire hose. And then the topic alerts, like how, like if you're really active in a research inquiry, like currently active, that's when I use them. It's like when I'm not trying to get introduced to a topic, I don't maybe set up topic alerts, but when I'm like really active, like I'm doing a census right now, like for the state of Utah, and like I need to know how to like create a survey, and I need to know how other people have created reading surveys and like how they have monitored them. And, so it's like that, a topic alert on like research on reading, like that I have set up. But, like if you're just kind of setting it up on a general topic, then like you basically kind of get like these daily digest emails, and you can like, if, the email ding that will come up and you're like working on something else and you're like, oh, what's this email? Oh, look, it's a topic alert from whatever database. And then, you end up like going to the topic alert. And then of course you're down some crazy rabbit hole and it's totally pulled you away from something else. So that is kind of the drawback, in my opinion, on just relying solely on topic alerts. Is it just, I don't know, sometimes it can leave me feeling a little less informed at times. Like you just kind of have to be smart about how you use them. So the way to kind of be smart about it is to work closely with a librarian. That's kind of like the gist of what I'm trying to get at. All right, so and this is because, each discipline has its own database, and then each database kind of has its own little tech ins and outs. Like they are all published by different people and entities, and they all have their own IT departments. So they're all going to kind of design them very differently. So like any database that you're going to go to is not going to look exactly the same. So that's what can also feel like a fire hose, but working with a librarian who really knows the database well and kind of knows the ins and outs of the tech piece of it is going to kind of help you navigate that piece and not feel like you're going to get lost really, really quickly. Okay, so what I want to kind of point you to in relation to this is like knowing the number of databases that the library has. And one cool feature, what I'm going to put in the chat, is a link to the library's database page. So it's just, databases.tools.lib.utah.edu. So it's an alphabetical listing. Initially, it's just alphabetical. You can go by type and discipline if you like, but just like from the get-go, it's just alphabetical. And then when you are kind of going by discipline, it'll have a database, like a recommended database at the very top of the page. So the librarian for that discipline area has sort of already recommended that top database. So it could be a really quick and easy place for you to start if you do want to set up these topic alerts. So you would start there. And then the next place I really want to point you to is to finding your librarian. And that's actually also related a little bit to number 5. So we have, I don't even know, like 50 different subject specialists here in the library. It might be more. Like we have specialists for format, and then we have specialists for disciplines, and then we have specialists for other like just basic subject and topic areas. So then what I really want you to point you to is the subject specialist page. And then you're going to find, like as you're discovering what your research interests are, then you can come back to the subject specialist page, figure out who that subject librarian is, and then make your connection with that librarian. And then that librarian is going to help you set up topic alerts and do other like literature-based work within a database. And then there's another really great guide too. So my colleague, Donna Zeigenfuss, she is just master librarian. So this guide she's got, it has some details on setting up topic alerts. So if you kind of prefer maybe just starting with the guide, you can definitely do that. But I really kind of want to steer you, to working with a librarian and kind of establishing that one-on-one connection so that you don't feel like you get lost in the database land and in the fire hose of literature. Okay, so then that basically takes us to the last tip, which is to, once you make that connection with your librarian, and in fact, you can even reach out to me for this, tip number 5, which is to get journal suggestions from your librarian. So that database page is going to give you that database suggestion from a librarian, but then I think you will want to go further and sort of figure out, okay, well, what journal is like really fitting the discipline I'm working within? And because there can be hundreds of journals within a discipline, like having someone to kind of help you figure out, what are the most read journals, or is there like a sub discipline journal that's going to be the best fit? Like it kind of it's an iterative process, and it just kind of takes some time. And it's basically what I do for a living. So like I sit here with people in my office and we look at all the journals and their discipline, and then we start to kind of like look at some more minute subject areas. And then we actually find journals. I help people find journals to publish in, which I know you'll get to at some point, but it would be the same process of finding journals to read too. It's like, okay, how often is it published? Is it going to be online? Is it going to be easy for me to get to? It's like we go through all that as we're looking at lists of journals in a discipline. So I definitely want you to reach out, and find your favorite let me help you find your favorite journal. Let me help you find your favorite scholarly society. And then that's going to really just kind of rein in the literature and help you stay on top of what's going on in the discipline. And then the one other guide I want to point you to is if you want some reading recommendations, like if you like books in addition to journals, I have this. If you're not quite ready to meet in person, like basically this guide kind of has like a little form, and the form just comes to me, and it just kind of, I designed a couple of just leading questions of like, okay, well, what did you read last? And what are you researching now? And so you could kind of answer those questions if you prefer kind of the mediated approach. And then that just comes to me, and that sort of initiates the conversation if you would prefer that route. Okay, so let me pause there. Those are the top 5 in my experience. And so let's just have conversation, take questions. Maybe people have other ideas.
While folks are thinking or typing their questions in the chat, because sometimes that takes a minute, we can start with those, the 2 questions that were pre-submitted. And I think we've talked about some of this already, but can you expand on?
Okay.
How do you remember everything? Do you keep an annotated bibliography as you're reading? What's your method there?
Yeah. I mean, you can't remember everything. It's pretty much impossible. So yeah, annotated bibliography works. I mean, you could do it in a Word document, I guess, if that's your preference. I like to use Zotero. Let me put that, I'll spell that in the chat. It is like a open source software. Some of you might have used it, and it's basically bibliographic management software. There's others too. There's like EndNote and Mendeley, but I like Zotero because it's open source and because I can like integrate it into my web browser. And they've got this really cool plugin that works on Safari. I'm pretty sure they've got it for other browsers as well. And basically, like as you're reading something, like if I'm reading something online, like in my browser, like I can click the little Zotero plugin, and then it goes into my Zotero library. And then that way I at least have a date stamp of when I was reading it. And then it does allow for notes, and then you can create other like little sub libraries. But I like the feature of at least having a date stamp, because I tend to kind of remember, like, I know I read this really great article a couple of days ago. What was it, and then I could go back to Zotero and see like when I clicked on the plugin and what the date was. Definitely keeping notes though. I mean, that it's like, that's going to be the best way, especially if you're actively working on a research project, like just having like either a Zotero library or having a Word document that's got like, the citation and then a couple of lines of your own notes.
We had one more pre-submitted, and then we have one in the chat. So the pre-submitted is what's the best method to use for reading literature in an efficient way? We can absolutely talk about that a little bit now, but also next week's education series event is on how to read a research article strategically. And so you'll have a full hour of that next week if you're planning on attending all of these. But if you wanted to address that a little bit, we could do that and then move on to the one in the chat.
Yeah, sure. I mean, definitely, I recommend the course like that. It sounds like that's going to be really great. I will, like, sometimes I'll just read the abstract and then that is sufficient, like, especially for me to kind of decide, like, should I go further? So like, I'll just kind of consult that. And if it's like not looking great, because like most abstracts now are kind of structured abstracts where we'll kind of include a little bit of like the methods and a little bit of discussion too. So then you could kind of get that snapshot. So it's a really quick and easy way to just, not have to read a 10-page article and just read like one paragraph. And then, I mean, I'm sure the class that in the future will have other tips, but I mean, again, I think like using the weekly podcast from the journal is, I mean, because you're not reading anything. You're just getting the journal editors and the journal staff's perspective on what's happening at the journal that week. And, if it's like a 20-minute episode, then that's going to be 20 minutes of your time to kind of figure out what's going on in the journal and then help you decide if you should go further with deeper reading. Okay, so those are both great questions. And now Eliana's question. Do you have any recommendations for keeping up with literature when you work at the intersection of many different disciplines? Yeah, such a good question. Should you keep up with them separately or should you search for subdisciplines? I would say search for subdisciplines. Because I mean, you could like kind of keep up with them separately, like maybe just initially to kind of give you like that foundation. If you needed the foundational approach, like that you're kind of pulling like the key articles from the two disciplines, that could make sense. But like moving forward, I think you're good there. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a journal out there that is already reflecting the intersection. So it's just a matter of finding the journal and then really keeping up with that journal. Great questions. And there's probably a podcast too. I bet there's like an interdisciplinary podcast within whatever scope you're working within. And so that would be worth looking into as well.
I've been multitasking, so please just shut me down if you've already talked about this and I missed it. Another thing that I do to keep up with or like newly outcoming articles on topics that I've already done that foundational work for, so like the keywords of my own research, is to set up a Google alert that just goes into a specific folder in my email. And so you just filter it right in, and then I can go into that email, or I can go into that email folder and see what the most recent titles coming out about whiteness are. And then I can be like, oh, this one overlaps with specifically what I'm doing right now. You know, this one's on a different approach that I'm not really thinking about at this moment, so I don't have to read it. And then I don't have to go back and redo my searches because they're coming to me, which is nice.
I think that's a great suggestion. I definitely like the idea of putting it into its own folder that then you go and check like separately. So how often would you say, do you go and look at the folder like every other day, like once a week?
It depends on where I am in my research process. I have a weekly email alert set up, and I might go in once a month and just see, oh, 25 things have come out in all these different journals, and then kind of prod deeper if any of them look interesting and helpful.
Nice. That's a great idea.
Let me clarify. It's a Google Scholar alert.
Mm-hmm.
Not anything that happens on Google with my keywords.
That would
Google Scholar.
Right. You would like fill up your folder like, pretty quickly.
So I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So going back to journal clubs, if I understand it correctly, it's not only just like posting journals on a website or something like that, but you also like have peers that you meet with.
Yep.
Too, right?
Yep.
Okay. How do you get peers? How do you notify people that your club is a thing?
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. I mean, I think it's just a matter of advertising in pretty much traditional and newer ways. Like if you were to start one, you could do some paper advertising throughout campus. The library could definitely help advertise through social media channels, and it really just also can become word of mouth. And so like for the reading club, I do a couple of reading clubs. There's a book club, and that one we meet in person, and I've been running it for a couple of years now, and people just find out about it and then they come to the library and we meet like on the first floor. And then for the journal club, like that's all just been by Zoom, and like not as many people have found out about the journal club as they have about the book club. So I don't get as many just, like almost like complete strangers coming to the journal club, but pretty much complete strangers come to the book club, and we just get together and we just meet. And so the same thing could happen, I would think, though, with any other kind of, especially if it was like a student run journal club, like there'd be great ways to advertise that, like, in the student newspaper, definitely. And then through I'm sure departments would be willing to advertise on behalf of a student run journal club as well. It would be really fun.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can I also just say, in terms of social media, everybody's got different preferences for which platforms they use, but academic Twitter is your best friend. So there's some hashtags that you can just sort of search and look through threads and get international perspective on what's going on with the different topics. But academic Twitter and academic chatter hashtags, they're so helpful. And then you can just lurk, right? You can just stay in the background. You don't have to participate and engage in the conversation until you feel comfortable, but you can kind of get that perspective and see who's talking about what, who are some more people you need to follow in your field. If you already use Twitter and you're like, you know what, I'd like to keep these things separate, you can have a personal Twitter, and then you can have your professional school academic Twitter where you follow all of those folks and talk about things in your academic way, and then do your personal tweeting on a different account. That's totally fine. You can blend them together. I love academic Twitter a lot.
That's a great idea. All right. So any final questions, thoughts? other recommendations?
Okay, well, if not, we will go ahead and wrap up. I'm going to share my screen with a different slide this time. And thank everybody. So thank what was it, 69 students, I think, at some point who had logged in. That's very exciting. Thank you all for coming, attending this event. And thank you, Allyson, for your insight, for your organization, for your willingness to facilitate this conversation.
You're
I
so
will
welcome.
post the Word document on the education series page. So if you
Okay.
didn't download it, it'll still be there. You'll have access to it. And just as a reminder, if you logged into the Zoom call in real time, your attendance is taken care of. If you are watching the video later and you want that to count for your education series attendance, please go back to the top of the education series page and fill out that evaluation form with your unit so that I can keep track of that.
I had a question real quick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go for it.
The Word document, does that contain all the links that have been shared within the chat?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and it's a PDF, and I can also email it to Shiver too. But yeah, it contains all the links.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate both of you.
Yeah, you're welcome.